Schools for the Colored, Village of Peace, an African American community in Israel, as well as Small Towns, Black Lives, among many others. So we once again want to express our sincere gratitude to Dr. White for blessing us with his presence on this afternoon, and I present to you Dr. Wendel A. White.
Thank you very much. Deeply appreciate that wonderful introduction. Yeah, I'll be all right. I don't want to get away. Oh, no, I'm not going to be all right. It was all the way over there. All right. So, hopefully, I'll talk to you from here, and everybody has seen me, I think, already. I have a couple of prepared remarks, but I want to start by first of all thanking Reverend and Mrs. Moore and First Lady Moore for inviting me to connect and be part of this wonderful celebration, 120 years. This is and when I was first contacted, it was really remarkable for me because this is the place where the project that eventually became Small Towns Black Lives started. When I first went to Whitesboro, I went there because a friend of mine who had grown up in Philadelphia and Sicklerville had cousins in Whitesboro when she was growing up, and she would go to Whitesboro during the summertime, growing up. And I was working at Essence Magazine in New York, and she was in New York. We were having lunch as I was getting ready to come down to my new job at Stockton University, Stockton State College then. One of our many names over the time. And she said, you might be interested in this community that I used to visit during the summertime. And that was in 1986. And I sort of had it in the back of my head, and it took me a couple of years, but by 1989, I found my way to Whitesboro. And really, the beginning was I found my way to First Baptist Church and Reverend Thompson, who then began making introductions for me because I said, this is what I'm interested in doing. I want to connect with the community. I want to meet people and make some photographs. And so he started making introductions for me to people in the community. So this is an important connection for me because this is where this project started. And as you'll see, and I'll give you some small samples of this. This project, Small Towns Black Lives, has led to almost 4 decades of work on different projects. So some of the other projects that you heard about all grew out of this work, and I can draw connections back to visiting Whitesboro and working on Small Towns Black Lives to all the other projects that I have worked on since then. I'm going to start out by just reading a small piece, quote that I have used from Isabel Wilkerson's book on cats, titled Cats. And this is a particular quote that I love, that it relates to the project and why I've been, all the things that I've been working on. She writes, America is an old house. We can never declare the work over. Wind, flood, drought, and human upheaval batter the structure that is already fighting whatever flaws were left unattended in the original foundation. When you live in an old house, you may not want to go into the basement after a storm to see what the rains have wrought. Choose not to look, however, at your own peril. The owner of an old house knows that whatever you are ignoring will never go away. Whatever is lurking will fester whether you choose to look at it or not. Ignorance is no protection from the consequences of inaction. And so that has been a really touchstone and inspirational idea for me throughout this project, because all of my projects are about Black life in this country, and even one in which I was not in this country. But and I'll tell you how it connects back to the United States, but all of them have been about that, and all of them about telling both the celebratory and painful parts of those histories, and how complicated it is, and how complicated it is sometimes to divide those one from the other. So I put a few images together for you from the book. And so this is actually one of the first images that I made, and I know that there are a couple of family members Spalding. This was taken just about a month or so before she passed. And so this was at the very beginning of the project. And a few of these images, sort of rearranged them in a way to tell a slightly different story. And so these were the initial connections that I made, largely Lackey, in the real estate office, and began talking to people. When I first started this project, I had never written anything to go with my photographs. I had only made photographs and let them stand on their own. But everyone I met had a story to tell about their history, the history of the community, and all of that was hugely important to me in terms of beginning to think about this project differently. And eventually, it took me a couple of years, it took me about, I moved on to another part of this project before I realized I had to go back and really capture some of those conversations. Luckily for me, I had carried a tape recorder with me when I met with folks, and often, recorded our conversations. We usually spent a couple of hours together in order to make a photograph, just to hear what everybody had to say about their town. And so I spent this with Mr. Reynolds. I spent a lot of time connecting with people throughout the Whitesboro community, in particular that first summer of 1989, Woody Armstrong in his barbershop. I think I have a photograph here, I eventually was fascinated with the origin story and its connection to Rosendale. And Mr. Armstrong told me a story about his father having gone to the train crossing to pick up the remains of George H. White's wife when her body was returned to North Carolina after she passed. And he told me about a little tour, and eventually I went down and actually looked for it. So it's the only photograph in small town Black Lives. In small town Black Lives it's not taken in the community. Then the next thing that happened to me was I got an invitation to the homecoming and reunion, and I came and made photographs of everybody and the activities. This is a later reunion in 2001, and so in the interim years I was photographing other communities. In the project there are 12 communities photographed throughout South Jersey. There's another later photograph near the end of the project entirely. When I returned to Whitesboro, here we are back with this Alex Jones in 1989, and the school. And this will become an important connection to the next project that I do, because Mrs. Spalding spent a lot of time talking about the school, which was only down the street from her house, and talked about the experience of the children that went to that school and the efforts of Black teachers to provide an excellent education to the students in that school. And that ultimately becomes something that I've become interested in, the complication of the work that Black educators did within segregation and the role and what happened at the end of that period of time. That's a whole other day, but this was some of the homes. I became interested in just photographing the place and making images of what it looked like. And this is that image in Rosendale. So I'd gone down to North Carolina. Actually, I have family also in North Carolina. We'd gone down and it so happened that there was going to be a reunion that year. And so it was a perfect opportunity to drive a little bit further than where we are located in Hosty, to go a little bit further down to Rosendale. So I sort of broke away for a day, traveled to Rosendale and looked around to make a photograph. And it was just an abandoned store by the side of the road. And this is and so then the last thing I think that I did during that first 1989 year, and this is, I'm a little bit confused about this, but I think this is for the 80th anniversary bulletin. I could be wrong about the exact year, but it was for one of the church bulletins. So a member of the church contacted me and said, you're photographing people, would you like to come back and make some photographs for our church bulletin that's coming up to celebrate what I thought was 80th. I could not have that memory clear. So this actually appears in the book. This is the mail tones, and it has everybody's name. Unfortunately, I made a lot of photographs, of which I don't always have. And this is a picture I made right around 1989 of the church itself. And then I spent a day meeting with different groups of folks coming through and making photographs of the various groups within First Baptist Church. Reynolds, yeah. And I'm hoping one of the things that will come out of this is that I'm going to make all of these photographs available to Reverend Mrs. Moore for the archive that they're working on. And I have more that I have additional photographs that I didn't have a chance to scan yet, because again, these were just in my archive of stuff that I hadn't used after the time that I provided to friends originally in 1989 for the bulletin. I hope to continue to find more of them and send them over so that as many images as I have that are still useful can become part of that archive. And I'm hoping, and one of the things I'm hoping is that there are people today that recognize some of the faces, and maybe I will even get a chance to attach some names to the people in these images. I hear some sounds of recognition out there. And here's Pastor Thompson. Let me just say something that I have often used to describe this project, and then I'll show you a few other images unrelated to Whitesboro. Small Town Black Lives project consists of photographs with the use of narrative fragments and various archival materials. The images depict public and private lives combined with text. They weave a visual representation of the present, accompanied with the collective memories of the community. Small Town Black Lives is also a multimedia web-based presentation that includes photography, text, archival documents, video, audio, and QuickTime VR. So as I continued to work on this project, I started to use other kinds of image making. So the website, which is still up today in its original form that it was in 2002, has video and it has audio recording. There is an audio recording on there of Mrs. Spalding talking about the school, but then there's other audio and video recordings of events taking place in other communities throughout the area. The photography began as a modest attempt to depict daily lives and activities. Shortly after beginning the project, I became aware of a cemetery not far from the college where I teach. 4 of the 5 remaining headstones were marked as veterans of the Civil War of the United States Colored Troops. Information about the origins of the cemetery was difficult to find since it was no longer a black community at that site. But this is in Port Republic, New Jersey. There had once been a black community, and today, even today, it's still pretty much predominantly all white community, no black community. But at one time, at the corner of that community, there was a black settlement there, and the cemetery still remains. And that was the beginning of my interest in research and archives, because I traveled to the National Archives to get the folders.
Is that
The Bowling Cemetery.
347?
The Bowling Cemetery.
I don't know the name of it. It's on the side of 347?
No, I think it's 561.
Okay.
I always have to remember, like, even though I was originally born in Newark, but I've been in and out, and it's like I have to I'm still acclimating after 35 years to New Jersey to South Jersey route numbers, but yeah, 561. The information I accumulated on Port Public's Black community prompted experiments with various formats. The current prints often incorporate narrative passages, and they turned into these photographs with text and the combination that you see in the book. And so from there, I wanted to sort of say these are a few images that I made at the time in Whitesboro that were not directly the church, but that I didn't get a chance to include in the publication. So they're images that people haven't seen before. This was from the reunion, but it was an image that didn't get used. Also from the reunion in 1989. We're done that for sure. That's counted as the first and the second. Anybody know the answer to that? No? I've heard different. It's the first one, right? Yeah, I think. And so one of the things that emerged, and I thought that would be appropriate today, is that as I traveled to different communities, often my intersection with the community was through various churches. And so throughout the Small Town Black Lives Project, there are images of places of worship throughout. This is the previous image was in Springtown in Greenwood. This is Chesilhurst on Whitewood Pike. This is also Chesilhurst. There are a couple of churches there. This is inside the Springtown Church. This is Mount Moriah in Ellesmere, or Blacksboro. This is Mount Pisgah in Lawnside. Mount Zion in Small Gloucester, an underground railroad stop. And this is Adat Bayat Moshe, a African-American Jewish community in sort of the Elwood area of New Jersey. It's still there, it's still active, and it was established by Abel Restus, and he called it America's Colored Hebrew Community when they first moved from Philadelphia out to this location around 1969, 1970 or so. His hope was to move to Israel at some point, and he traveled to Israel with the idea that he would take his family, he had 24 children, and their spouses, and one wife, and moved to Israel, but he ultimately was not satisfied with the connections that he was able to make, and so they wound up staying there. And so they have been there. Some of the children from this community have come to Stockton. I've met them, and so they've been there for several generations. Trinity, Amy, and Gouldtown. And this was the United Methodist Church in Springtown. And so, as I mentioned to you, just how important all of this was to connecting me to other projects and other ideas. One of them was between 2004 and 2006, I traveled twice to Israel to visit the African Hebrew Israelite community in Dimona, Israel. If you're not familiar with it, it is a group of African Americans that left the sort of Chicago. I think some people came from the Detroit area. There was actually a split within the group, but this part of the group believed it was time to return to Israel. They also, the narrative of the community is that African Americans are one of the tribes of Israel, and so they were returning to where they, originally came from. And they traveled back through Liberia for a couple of years and then back to Israel. Yeah, they stayed for a while and struggling with citizenship, but today they have a kind of permanent resident status in Israel. Some of the young people actually have served in the IDF. I just read an article in the paper. I keep track of the community that one of the members of the community was killed during some of the recent conflicts. And this is just one portrait of the daughter of one of the leaders of the community in the Dimona settlement. another project that grew out of, and so that grew out of this because some of the folks that I knew at Stockton said, you know, you're working on these small towns, black lives. There's this essentially a small African American settlement in the desert in Israel, and so it drew me to try and connect, and they were very willing to let me come in and photograph, in part because I was able to show them the work that I had done in places like Whitesboro. So they, I think, saw a parallel to what they were trying to do there. The other thing was Mrs. Spaulding's conversation with me about the school and the importance of the school and the black teachers led to me working on a project that became Schools for the Colored. It is a survey of what remains of what were historically segregated schools between the Atlantic Ocean and Mississippi River, but all in the north: New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. And one of the things that was important to me was to talk about segregation in the north. As soon as we say the word segregation, we have, I think we conjure a picture in our mind of the South. And I was really became increasingly interested in talking about northern segregation and how, in this particular case, educational institutions, you know, were segregated throughout the north. This is a photograph of what we refer to as the Bordentown School. Was the official name of it was the New Jersey Manual Training and Industrial School for Colored Youth. It's a 90-acre campus. If you've never been there, there are about 12 buildings. It's still maintained by the state. It no longer functions as a school. It is part of the juvenile justice system, and it is a detention center for juvenile females. So it is literally a school that became a prison. So it's a very interesting and complicated place in terms of that. And I know a lot of different people have been working on trying to sort of restore it to its educational. It was started originally by a pastor in Bordentown in around 1900, and then within a few years it was transferred to the state and became this, you know, very. I've come across so many people that attended as boarding school. It's the only state-run boarding school in the north. Yeah.
Did you speak with, he's going on, but Reverend Watkins, he went to this boarding town.
I haven't spoken to him, but actually the president of Stockton,
going on.
right. The president of Stockton would tell me she didn't attend. Vera King Barris didn't attend Bordentown School, but she would go as a young girl to events because they would have big events there, bring in speakers and things like that, people in the black community all around the state. So,
And in addition, he was also a Buffalo soldier.
he was Buffalo.
Yeah, and he lived in Whitesboro.
Oh, okay.
George
Watkins, okay.
He was a member of First Baptist.
First Baptist. So I don't. If I did meet him, I don't know.
Writing, I did a little writing on him.
Oh, okay.
But
Wonderful.
he was alive. So.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know.
Share that with you.
Yeah, I would love that. I don't know if I met him or not. I would have to have somebody help identify him in a picture, but he's certainly not somebody I wrote about in my memory.
That just made me recall that.
Recall it. Yeah, it's such an important school. It's such an important site, right? There's a great documentary film about it. And then the current project is a project called Manifest, in which I have been photographing artifacts of the history of African Americans in public collections in different parts of the country, but the most recent project has been to look at the public collections in the 13 colonies. It started while I was thinking that I was going to work on a project on the origins of the NAACP while I was upstate New York, and I happened to go to the University of Rochester, and because I was interested in information about Frederick Douglass, and they had a lot of Frederick Douglass's hair. And the idea that I could come in close contact with a piece of Frederick Douglass's body completely changed the project. I decided that I needed to look at what was in public collections and what could be photographed in public collections. Yeah. That's his hair, yeah. At the University of Rochester, the Rush Reeves Library. Special collection. It's not circulating, right?
I don't know how many people are aware, but Frederick Douglass was as vice president, running for vice president.
Oh, really? Okay.
I can't remember the lady's name.
Okay.
Holland.
Okay. Oh, okay. I don't know that. Yeah. So, this brings me just to one more statement that has become really important to me in the way that the Isabel Wilkerson one has. And this is James Baldwin. History, as no one seems to know, is not merely something to read. And it does not refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it with us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do. It could scarcely be otherwise, since it is to history that we owe our frames of reference, our identities, and our aspirations. And so I'll just mention that this is then the newest project that I've been working on, which is a version of Manifest called Manifest 13 Colonies. And this is a project that was mentioned in the introduction, that's been sponsored by the Peabody Museum at Harvard. And my proposal was that we were coming up on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And it seemed to me, especially in the context of conversations around 1619, that I wanted to talk about the Declaration of Independence as an important inflection point in terms of thinking about the history of race in the United States. And I think many of us know that at one point, even though he was a slave owner, Thomas Jefferson wanted to insert a line into the Declaration condemning slavery, and he had to remove that paragraph of text in order to win over the southern states' support for the Declaration. So it's that idea that there have been many inflection points throughout our history that deal with this. And I think certainly 1619 is important, the Declaration of Independence, obviously Civil War. I worked on a project that I titled Red Summer about race riots in America in 1919 after World War I. So there are many of these, and obviously we certainly, I think, all are connected to the Civil Rights era. There are many of these inflection points, but the Declaration is one of them, and it's an important one, and it's important to remember that that was a moment in which the country turned away from the idea of condemning that institution, and we were left with a kind of legacy for a period of time after that. And so it's a continual process. As Isabel Wilkerson says, if you live in an old house, you have to pay attention, to all the things that might need attention or tending or repair, right? And so that's a critical part of the life that we lead. So thanks very much. It's a important project, and I appreciate you taking a few minutes away from the dessert, and thank you again.